Today I'm talking to Michael, one of our clients in County Limerick. Michael has a live-in care for his father from our agency and began his cooperation with our agency back in March 2020. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Tom.
How are you today?
I'm great.
Well, thank you, Michael, very much for taking time out of your busy day to talk to us about your experience of having a live-in care from AL Home Care. Michael, my first question to you is, what were the circumstances that led you to contact AL Home Care?
I'll tell you, Tom, my dad was living on his own in the town or in a country town. He'd been in hospital with various medical issues towards the end of 2019 and in the early months of 2020. And he ended up coming out to our local community hospital then for some respite care and some physio and so on. We realised when he was coming towards the tail end of that stay that he wasn't going to be able to live at home on his own independently, i.e. that he had mobility issues and that he just wasn't in a position, having spent a few months in hospital, to look after himself properly at home. And it was made quite clear to us by the people in the hospital that they wouldn't be happy to leave him out or discharge him into his own house on his own. So at that point, then we started looking at how we were going to manage the situation, and we looked at bringing in carers on a daily basis or an hourly basis, and trying to develop a rota between his three children, of which I'm one, to look after him with the assistance of contracted healthcare workers. Or we also looked at the nursing home situation at that stage, and we were kind of caught betwixt and between trying to figure out what was the best plan, and our local community health nurse recommended your agency and recommended that we consider the service that you can offer and whether it would fit our needs.
What has it been like having a live-in care from AL Home Care?
It's been great, Tom, to be honest, because I know for the first probably 5 or 6 weeks that my dad came from hospital, we spent a lot of time looking after him ourselves. We're all three of us were working full time, and you know it was a very difficult scenario. We had assistance from some other agencies, but very hard to depend on it. We often got calls to say that the carers couldn't come, or that there was a mix up in scheduling, and you know it was a stressful time. So when we got our first care via your agency and got her settled in and used to the run of the house and got her acquainted with my dad, you know, things became an awful lot easier for us as a family. And it turned into a situation, I suppose, where we were quite happy going into the house and spending a half an hour with him and going in there regularly and having a chat with him, but being able to walk away with the knowledge that he was being well looked after. And I think that's the primary benefit of the service that you're offering, is that you can still be there and be involved, but the primary responsibility in terms of spending a lot of time looking after the day-to-day stuff is looked after by the care provided by your agency.
And was it an added reassurance as well, knowing that there was someone in the house at night?
Absolutely, because well, I know initially when my dad came home, we would have added a good bit of technology to the house in terms of cameras in different parts of the house and motion monitors on his chair and on his bed. Now it turned out that those weren't needed subsequently, but those initial few weeks I can remember spending every second night there myself. And you know, while there were no real care needs at night, I found it difficult to get into a routine where I could sleep properly. And I know when our first carer came in, my father was probably well settled after his hospital stay at that stage, but he was sleeping more or less undisturbed, and we knew that there was someone there in an emergency situation. He also has a panic button on his hand, which dials me first if there's an issue. It was great having knowledge there that someone was looking after him at night and being there if anything did happen.
And Michael, what advice would you give to a family who might be considering their options right now in terms of care for an elderly relative?
I think in the round, we've been very satisfied with the service that you provided. I know I've spoken to a few people, I suppose, that have been in that situation over the last number of months, and I know it's probably trying to assess, one, what level of care is required. Is it a case where you may need one or more carers? And if you can establish that you can devise a schedule that will work with one carer, and that you're in a position to provide some cover for that person when on their days off, I think it's a fantastic alternative for anyone that might be torn between a choice of care at home and a nursing home scenario. I know that my father is 10 times happier at home in his own environment. We live in the middle of a small town, but where he is at home, he's accessible to relations and friends and acquaintances that would call in and say hello to him for 5 or 10 minutes and go on about their business. I know that if he was in a nursing home scenario, he wouldn't have half as much of that social contact. And I strongly believe that he'd be much less physically and mentally well off in a nursing home environment. It's probably everyone's circumstances are different, but I would say I try and come up with a plan to any family to see, can you make a situation fit where one of your carers can work with a family to look after an elderly relative. And I think you'll find that your care recipient appreciates it, and the family itself will feel benefits of it as well.
And my final question, Michael, it's fairly common that an elderly person will resist the idea of a live-in carer. Did you find that with your dad?
My dad was 86 when we had to sit down and talk to him about the care piece and discuss the possibility of a live-in carer. So most definitely he'd lived independently all his life and had lived on his own following my mother's death about 3 years previously. And he would have strongly resisted the notion of having someone living in with him. He would have regarded it as a loss of independence. And another motivating factor that would have set strongly with him as well was the financial impact and the cost of that service and care. So we would have sat down with him and we would have said, when he was coming out of hospital, and we would have probably had to speak to him and say, look, these are the options that are open to us. And, look at the financial consideration and look at what were the various costs associated with each of those alternative courses of actions. And we would have looked at the cost with contracted healthcare workers coming in on an hourly basis, which was a very expensive way of doing business. We would have looked at the cost of a nursing home, and we would have looked at the cost of a carer. And we would use one of your carers, Tom, the regular schedule on a weekly hours basis would be in around the 50 hours mark, which all the carers we've had have been happy and delighted to work those hours. But we'll say with the wages, the employer's PAY or the employer's PRSI, your agency fees, it still works out at probably 40% less at least than what you would have in a nursing home scenario. So I know with my dad, when we sat down and ran the numbers, he would have been quite happy to give it a go. He would have been apprehensive, and we would have taken the view, look, we'll try it and see how we get on, and we can reassess the situation if you don't like it or you don't. And the fact, I think as well, Tom, that you offer a kind of a 3-week bedding in period with new carers gives a good opportunity to test the water and make sure that there's a fit between the carer and the care recipient. I would also say that, we've had 3 carers now from the agency. Just our 3rd one started recently. All of them have been a very good fit, all different personalities, and it has taken a bit of time for them and my dad to acclimatise. But he's been very fond and happy with each of them. Had quite different relationships with the 3 of them, but he would fully understand at this stage, nearly 2 years later, that he knows that he's not safe on his own he knows that he understands more probably in terms of his care needs than what he would have done at the time when he came out of hospital initially. And he's quite happy with the status quo. Would he prefer to be living on his own? Absolutely. But he knows he can't, and he knows that he's well looked after and is quite happy with that scenario. And just even on the financial side of things, which I didn't probably factor into my cost differentiation between a carer and a nursing home, when we do his tax returns at the end of the year, he gets a rebate of nearly all the tax he's paid at the end of the year on the back of the costs of having that care at home. So that also negates a good chunk of the cost of the care and makes the situation more palatable to him as well, that he can see that it's the financial benefit of that.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for discussing those points with me. And I'm sure families will really appreciate listening to your story, and that it will give them greater confidence, to proceed and give live-in care a go.
Perfect, Tom.